So please.
So, do you hear me well? Yeah. So as you can see, very different from most of the other presentations. I hope you find this quite interesting, as I do. So, who of you have already heard of 4D printing? One? Two? Cool. How about 3D printing? Most, yeah. Cool. And about biomimetics or biomimicry? Some. Okay, cool. So I'm going to present like quite basic concepts today, and maybe you have the opportunity to see something in a little bit more depth in 2 weeks when I'm going to be back to the institute. So it started. Does it move? No. Vê se funciona aqui.
I don't know.
No. Not. Has it worked? Okay. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So throughout my adulthood, I have worked on biomimetics and trying to build toys, basically toys. So this was one of my, or actually the very first time I learned something about biomimetics, because I started studying engineering, then I moved to architecture, and then back to engineering, and all kinds of crazy things here I'm going to tell you about at some point. So this was a very nice partnership between Buckminster Fuller and the structural engineer and architect Titotto, trying to think about a way to create a protected environment for Manhattan. So this is part of the School of Futurism, but a very nice partnership between a scientist and an engineer artist. So many years later, I am doing mobility in Berlin, and I'm sat there and I look, oh wow, so how this relates to that first project I saw in the beginning of my undergraduation. And I started to become fascinated about how these cables were displaced, and how we could learn more from nature to build these kind of things. Then I was in contact with Nicola Grimshaw, that was doing the Eden project in Cornwall in the UK. And as, of course, not having the money to decide when and how to do these things by my own, a fascinating way to test the concepts was going through art via installation artworks. So I could do these experiments in a very small scale, and people could get quite interactive with this. So this I exhibited in 2008 at the Museum of Contemporary Art at the University of São Paulo, Cidade Universitária. So all these these are things that are based on some principles that we say, let's say, life principles that biomimetics is all about. So in a way that we try to mimic life somehow. So how do we do this, and what are some applications for that? So first, it's a bit obvious that nature tries to do things in a way that it perpetuates the existence. And in the most economical. I wouldn't say cheap, not to sound so bad, but in a way that we can see continuity of things and how they evolve in a way that it is possible for the structure, the system to continue existing. And it's only possible when we think about materials that are widely available there instead of trying for something very specific that is really far that would not be able to work. So we are thinking about resource efficiency in terms of material, energy, very life-friendly chemistry, so basically trying to use water as much as possible instead of other more complex things. Be locally attuned and responsive, so not trying to look for materials that are not available in that area. Adapt to changing conditions for very obvious reasons as well. Evolving to survive, integrating development with growth. So some of the characteristics, if not all of them, we are going to see as well in the 4D printing, which was one of the reasons why I naturally moved more towards this field in the last few years. So just a comparison about, in general, man-made systems are simpler instead of the complexity of several degrees of freedom that we find in the biological ecosystems. Nature tries to have zero waste while engineers, and architects wrongly waste a lot, until we find something more optimized, while nature is more regenerative, while we are more extractive, at least the most traditional way of doing things. And using local resources while we are thinking about all these global resources and how to get delivery of these things, right? So the two main methodologies for using these inspirations from nature to solve human problems are basically bottom-up and top-down. In our case means, so we define the problem and then we try to look for the solutions. So identifying the functions that we need and then seeing in this pool of opportunities in nature what might work. And then, so this is the brainstorm phase, trying to prototype this and testing this, and then we get to the solution. So from a pool of pre-selected solutions, or in a nicer approach of more basic science and technology. So having that ecosystem or that structure is studied, and then from that is studying how we could possibly use that mechanism for improving something for humans without having a pre-concept of what could happen. So both are very, very, very interesting. I try to be even more interested in this one, although in engineering many times we face more these opportunities. So I'm going to give you some examples of things I'm talking about. So, I don't know if you have seen this plant that in contact with water, it changes the color. It becomes transparent. So it's because the cells are built in more like a loose structure, so the light passes when they're in contact with water, and then there is the possibility to see through. Or this dancing plant, there are two main reasons for this. One is adapting more to the sun changes throughout the year, and also to mimic butterflies that are pregnant so that they don't use this space because it looks like it has already been occupied. So it's not that we find only one function for things. Sometimes there are many possibilities that we find in the same, in the same structure, in the same being, or in the same ecosystem. So who has not played with this? I was one of the craziest kids playing this, trying to understand this since I was like 4, 5, 6 years old. And about the maracujá, Passiflora edulis as well. I was trying to understand. So these were my toys when I was a child. I was no interested in Nintendo or something. So I was trying to understand how I could make this serve the purposes of the things I was wanting to build, or how this could become a dress for a monster or something. And I still encourage my kids to follow the same path, you know. So these tank drills are very interesting because they look for the opportunities of stability and growth of the plant. And we can think about structural opportunities in architecture, in structural engineering, that are not so obvious at first place. So the Dionea is very interesting. Some people find it a bit yucky, but you know, it's part of nature. Many things happen. Or this one trying to move really slowly, but yeah, the plant knows you are getting there. So the carnivorous plants are a great source of inspiration. So that we learn from nature and we apply this to human purposes. The flying grasshopper is very interesting as well because there is this mixture of something that is quite static and with the movement, those little wings there. And of course, the coral reefs are always something really, really interesting because they know how to make these very deep partnerships so that the corals survive. So, and unfortunately, they are dying faster and faster. So during my holidays or something, I always try to go have some experimental work there and take some pictures as well. And all kinds of animals really have something to teach us, but the jellyfishes are also some of my favorites. And so the researchers that are part of our group very often look into these structures not only from the micro point of view and from the micro point of view as well. The sea urchin and the typical movements of this. So it's not only about jumping from Ilha Bela and hurting your feet. You know, there is something much more interesting about this too. You see how subtle these movements are, but they permit series of functions, including the animal to move and to eat. The sea cucumber, that is one of the most complex non-vertebrate animals, species. The anemone, the complexity of these movements, you believe it or not, they were most easily understood without more complex mathematical modeling via traditional crochet making. So the patterns were more easily understood because with the traditional structures that we in our undergraduation time are more used to, like very, very square things, it's very difficult for students to understand this, and via crochet the visualization of this is more easy. So these are some other exhibitions I was doing, trying to understand the mechanics of some of these animals. and sometimes fusing functions of different animals and trying to create something different. So this was at the Polytechnic School at University of São Paulo with my friends there. So my work became much easier when I learned more about the 3D printing. That is now 39 years old, but most of us have only got in contact with this in the recent years, right? So Philip Beasley is an architect in Canada that started many years ago working with additive manufacturing and also the laser cutting and trying to mimic environments based, for example, in birds, plants, creating also non-existing beings, and including these protocells here that are basically fat that is programmed to be the source of energy to the movement of these artworks. And they react also with the human presence. So we get near to one of these, for example, and then it breathes, or it reacts in a way that responds to the kind of behavior. So if you arrive in with more speed or not, you know, like it tries to understand. So there is also some kind of machine learning, deep learning as well involved in this kind of work. So as you can see, it's impossible to work by ourselves. We need partnerships, right? So this Holozoic is so amazing. So it was inspired by the lungs and how they breathe, and these nets. These were huge. So the 3D printers that we see most often, they are they just use normal polymers that are cheaper, but we can find many kinds of things. So for more, let's say, more sustainable point of view, there is sugar. We can have different kinds of rubbers, metals. So even paper, we can have also 3D printing with paper. So this, for example, was a way that this group, nervous system, was trying to create very customized dresses. So basically, they understand how the mesh can produce very different results. And this is also based on biomimicry experiments. So, by the way, biomimicry is the American school and biomimetics is the European school, but they are pretty much the same thing. And then the main difficulty of the 3D printing is that it produces very static, completely static devices and objects. While I think the world with all these possibilities of dynamics is so much interesting. So what could be possible if these structures could move? So adding one extra dimension of time and a more sophisticated design and frequently particular combinations of materials, we have the 4D printing. So the 4D printing continues using the traditional most used techniques of 3D printing, but it responds to environmental stimuli. So basically via passive energy, instead of just plugging it to any plug and having active energy going through. So it reacts, for example, to changes in light, in temperature, in how much water is around, or the pH, magnetic field. And here, this outer layer is about the materials that could be used as well. So hydrogels, they are the most common ones in many applications, because basically when we put a hydrogel inside water, we know that it's much easier to be tested than in the other cases. But we have also so different kinds of materials, so putting together ceramics, metals, we can have elastomers as well. And here are some applications. So for packaging, for structural origamis, for tissue engineering, metamaterials as well. So a few of you might also be interested after this. So with very, very serious design, we can predict how these hinges are going to move. And even if we use simpler, simpler materials, we can obtain quite interesting results. So these are multi-materials. So you see here different layers. So this movement from the flat, then going to the three-dimensional shape. So inside the water, what does it happen? It folds itself. So we can find things that, as in nature, can self-assembly. They can self-repair. They can do things, perform functions by their own. So the detail of the movement here. So here are some kind of possibilities that we have for folding, bending, twisting, curling, deformations, both linear and non-linear. So there is a whole world of possibilities there within very, very few verbs. So here, using hydrogel, so mimicking the movement of the petals. Of course, this we are not going to use as a petal. It's not display of art, but it's how we can apply this kind of mechanism to other things that could be used for example, for grips, for more advanced medicine during surgeries and what so on. So here, the way it's printed in layers, so finishing to be printed as flat, and then inside water, the complexity of movement that is possible with this technology. So here are some advantages and limitations for each of the stimulus. Of course, we are always going to have advantages and limitations, but I think that as we progress more and more in this field, we are starting to get answers. So they are fields that biomimetics, as we know now, started in 2006, and 4D printing in 2012. So they are quite recent fields of research that can be used from the food industry, sensors, actuators, tissue engineering and drug delivery, architecture, even fashion. So it's still in its infancy, you see. So there is, in this prediction, so at least 10 more years to get to the peak of inflated expectation, let's say, then another at least 10 more years to become a more established field of research. So I think we will have time to have lots of opportunities to collaborate in the future. If you might have any questions, I'll be very glad to talk more about this now or during the breaks, anytime you like.
Thank you for this very nice talk, questions. So can you comment on the challenges that you have in the 4D printing, and which tools actually you needed in order to, is more a material problem, or you have already everything to?
Cool. So from the design point of view, is basically getting to find researchers in the team that are more specialized in the understanding of the mechanics, and not someone that just knows how to program or just to use AutoCAD. And from the material point of view, is the specific formulation. So several times, like, we spent months trying to design the best formulation for that. And then when we eventually can print it, we realize that the cycle only works for, let's say, 10, 15, 20 times, which from the commercial point of view could be a problem. So in the case of hydrogels, finding something that is sustainable, that is not going to damage the environment, but that is also long-lasting from the point of view of consumer, is a real challenge for the commercialization of these things, for us to trust that these things is, you know, like during the surgery, is not going to break so easily, for example. So we have challenges in both areas, but maybe because I am originally from the design point of view, I think that the material problem is a little bit more tricky.
Hi, very nice talk. Your images are amazing. So I was wondering, do you have some example, or have you worked with materials with negative Poisson ratio, for instance? Negative Poisson ratios with their materials that, like, when we stretch them, they like expand. I was just trying to make connection with some of your examples with this type of materials.
So as it's still in its infancy, we haven't been able to get to do something very reliable. So one of my master's students is working with auxetic materials and trying to understand between these two fields what is possible to do or not. So we tried to do some things with rubber that didn't really work so far. Yeah, it's still a bit challenging. So in our lab, the best things we could do so far were with hydrogels, so basically cellulose-based and Nippon.
As you like to swim, there is some films of cellulose that when you shine light, it starts to swim and goes out of the light. So you put the light, it goes out. When you put the light there, it goes out. Have you heard about that? There is a group in Portugal with this, we do this type of films, very, very nice.
Let's talk more about it. Very nice.
For the questions. So if that's not the case, let's thank Silvia again. So thank you very much.